Chavez here. Today is Tuesday, February 6th, 2018, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, your first daily dose of happy for the day. And Cindy, we are back in our little cold snap part of winter again. We got ice and snow coming, and so not a lot of happy people out there, except for my wife, who wants all the ice to turn to snow. So this is a shout out to my wife. We're hoping that the snow comes so you can go skiing.
Has she gotten a chance? I know she's been wanting to.
There were a couple times where she had the opportunity, but one thing or another, and she never actually got out there. So she hasn't been out to ski yet this year, and she's really looking forward to it.
I was going to say, you kind of have to be like ready at a moment's notice. You never really know when there's going to be enough, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's 57 degrees here right now, and it's supposed to get up into the low 70s today. So I don't know if we've had our last, snap of winter, or, it's been so weird this year, up and down and up and down. With you too, it seems like.
Oh yeah, it's crazy winter, no doubt about it. I mean, Tom lives out in Denver, Colorado. Didn't get their first snow until late January. I mean, really, really strange. Very strange.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
not what you'd expect
we
at
all
all.
just have to be a little flexible to ride that. We've got to have more than just the normal clothes in the closet,
Yeah, it's not a usual year
people
when
put away all their clothes, and then for the spring or whatever. This year, it's sort of been like, oh, I'm glad I still had some things left out.
It's not a usual year when New England gets more snow than the Rockies. It's pretty unusual.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Yeah, that's pretty strange.
Well, so what's going on that's great?
Well, let's see. Lots of good stuff has been going on. Yesterday, we hit a milestone. During the podcast with Wendy Dillard in the afternoon, we had our 20,000th play. So that was a pretty cool milestone. Yeah, that was a really good one.
That's exciting.
It's very exciting.
Very exciting.
And
awesome.
We have a new addition to the lineup coming up starting not tonight, but next Tuesday. We're going to add a 12th time slot. This will be Tuesdays from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And this is something that Tom Wells and I are going to do together. We're doing it because we realize that much as we like doing the drive time slots, it's not a great time for people who want to call in. So we figure let's try it as an experiment for a while, see if people do call in, see if they take advantage of it. And if they do, then we'll figure out what the next step is. We'll just at least stick with that one for a while. And I'm not quite sure how to go about doing, making it available like 5 nights a week or something like that, because I'm not sure my schedule can handle that. And right now, the only person who can run the board is me. But I'm still working on strategies to make it possible for you guys to run the board so that we can have, a large number of people doing shows. But right now, we'll have a Tuesday night show. And that's going to be the next step forward, so to speak, in this show.
Well, that's going to be a fun experiment.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see, first of all, if people do want to call in, and second of all, how many people call in, how much interest is there. We just don't know. So, you find out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I still think that people may call in now, we just have to keep letting them know. So
this is true. We haven't let them know in a while.
We'll let you know.
Yeah, right. Well, they can call in now. I mean, people who want to call in on the morning and afternoon time slots can certainly do so. The number will be changing, but right now the number is 860-264-5432. And so if you do want to call in, feel free to call that number. We'll be glad to talk with you. How about you, Cindy? Anything great happening in your life?
Well, I'm thinking that the best thing that's happened recently is my son coming into town, and I've already told you about that. But it really was so great, and he's a chef, a 5-star chef, and so they do these things that they call pop-ups, where some restaurants in big cities will bring him in, and he'll do a pop-up dinner, so just like a one-night dinner. And when he was here doing some consulting on his visit, he got invited to come back very soon and do a pop-up dinner.
Uh-huh.
So it's usually a small dinner where it's just like 20 or 30 seats, and they cook amazing things. And so it looks like I'm going to get to see him again really soon. So that's really awesome.
Fantastic. That's great. Now,
Yeah.
I have to ask, when he comes to visit, who does the cooking?
Well, actually, this last time we went out, so nobody did the cooking. He was here this last time.
There you go. Leave it.
We like to cook together, though. That's one of the things that we did in the past that
Oh, nice.
really, really brought a lot of happiness to us. Is we would just get in the kitchen and cook something together. And so we keep talking about that. We need to cook when you come next time, but we end up going out because he's here, and it's like Cajun food. So he's wanting to eat all these things that he grew up eating.
Right, sure.
And doesn't always find.
And even a 5-star chef needs to go out and get pampered sometimes.
Exactly. That's right. He shouldn't have to do all the cooking all the time, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's the part of enjoying life is you don't have to do all the cooking.
Hey, that's really part of my enjoying life. I'm going to tell you, I just cooked like a fiend for like decades, and then I joked about it, but I used to say, yeah, I think my cooking meter is pegged. Like I've already done all the cooking one person can do in a lifetime. Now I'm ready to just have someone else do it, and the cleaning dishes too.
Oh, that's funny. That's great.
The other part.
Actually, it ties in with the topic too.
Today, Walt?
Well, it ties into the topic because the topic is happiness strategies, and one of the happiness strategies has to be not cooking all the time.
It's kind of funny. I think as humans, and some of us probably more than others, but we can be fickle sometimes, and things that really bring us a lot of joy, if we get burnt out on them, not bring us so much joy anymore, right? So I think that's part of expansion and part of us always wanting to do more or have more or be more, to explore, to adventure, is that if we get, I joke sometimes about the difference between a groove and a rut, right? It's like sometimes we feel like this is working so great, I'm really in a groove, but sometimes that same activity, whatever it is, can start feeling like a rut if we get tired or burn out on it. So I think that that's one of the strategies maybe for more happiness, is to be aware of what things are bringing us joy. So just because they brought us joy like 5 years ago, doesn't mean they still are now.
That's true. So is a groove a rut that's kind of worn out, or the other way around?
Well, if you think about it, the definition is probably pretty much the same, right? And yet they really have different meanings when you use them in a sentence.
Yeah. I mean, because when I think of a groove, I think of, well, this shows my age, but I think of an old vinyl LP record. Your needle is in the groove of the record, whereas a rut is like this big, kind of rotten, large, trenched out thing, right? So it's the groove after it's the groove after like 15,000 plays of the record. There's nothing left of the record,
So yeah, I think it's important to be aware. So more happiness strategies, though, that's the part that I really like about this topic.
Yeah, because strategies are something that I think we all need, not just people who practice law of attraction and deliberate creation, but even just people who haven't really either bought into the whole idea of it or just don't even know about it. We all need to have ways of improving our levels of happiness. And I guess probably the first stage is recognizing we can actually improve our levels of happiness. I mean, I know, speaking for myself, and probably true of many other people, many of us don't realize we actually have any control over that. We think we're just kind of, suffering the winds of fate, so to speak. But actually having strategies where we can improve and increase the number of times we're feeling happy and even get to the point where we are feeling happy throughout the day, that seems like, whoa, that's way off land for some people.
Well, it's funny because the word happiness, if I recall correctly, the etymology of the word is that it's like something, it's from the word hap, or like happens, right? I happed upon something. Like it has nothing to do with what we have control in. It's just something happened. But we do have control over it. We can create strategies for our happiness. And yet, like you said, I think about people that say, and they may say this of other people more than themselves, but they may define themselves or someone else as to their level of happiness. Like, oh, yeah, she's not a very happy person.
Right.
Right? Or they'll say, well, I don't find too much happiness. And so there's that self-definition. It's that becomes that I am statement that has so much power. And so when we recognize, no, it is up to us. And there are concrete things we can do. It's not all about just mental activity, like I have to psych myself up and pretend like I'm happy. That may work sometimes, but there are actual physical, concrete things we can do. Like I read one time that making your bed in the morning is one of the most important things that you can do to raise your happiness level.
Well, maybe your happiness level. I really dislike making my bed.
Well, the reason it was a scientific study, and the reason why they said that was because people that made their bed, well, first of all, most of the time when people make their bed, it's in the morning when they get up. So it's one of the first things that they do, and that they have a sense of accomplishment after doing it, however small. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about kind of game theory before. It almost, to me, sounds like one of those things, right? It's like we get a badge, the bed-making badge.
Right.
So we make the bed, we get up and make our bed, and we have started the day completing something that gave us a sense of accomplishment. And right there, the brain chemistry starts to say, oh, this is good, happy chemicals start happening.
Well, that's definitely part of it.
I love that example, though, because it's something that people can actually do. They're not just waiting and hoping that they're going to be happier. They can take a step.
Okay.
And you don't have to, Walt.
Well, I won't, but I'm glad that other people can. That's good. It's good that other people can get happy doing that. For me, it's an annoyance, but I'm glad that they like it. That's good. And I was looking up online as you described the etymology of happiness because I was curious, after what you said there. And sure enough, I mean, the etymology basically comes from an Old Norse and Old English root, hap, the root of happiness, which means luck or chance.
Right.
That's really interesting. And in fact, there's also an Old French version, H-E-U-R. I guess that would be he or hu. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it. But it gives us bonheur, and that means good fortune or happiness. And once again, there it is, fortune. So it definitely, over the years, it has started from the idea of being fortunate, of being lucky. And as I read that, I think to myself, you know what? That's one of the things that LOA teaching is trying to reverse, the idea that it's just whatever is lucky, whatever just happens to you. And it's not. It's more than that. So I actually feel proud now to be part of the Law of Attraction movement because we're trying to make a significant change in the way that we define a key word.
The word that I kept trying to think of when I was talking about that was happenstance.
Right.
I don't know if I said it or not, but right. So it goes back to what you just said, but lucky or by chance. And no. Let's change the definition here to be something that we can do. But something that's interesting that I want to mention is the idea of, and we've talked about this before, but the idea of having basic needs, and that when we have those needs met, we feel better. Mm-hmm. And when those needs aren't met, we feel uncomfortable. Like I like to use the words comfortable or pleasurable and uncomfortable or painful instead of we feel good or we feel bad. I know I just try to stay away from good or bad just because all of our emotions are valuable. But the other word that we're talking about today is strategy. And I often tell people when they tell me that they have a need for something, they're really talking about a strategy, not a real need.
That's true.
If we can get clear on the needs, then we can actually create a strategy that will work instead of getting the two confused.
So how do we begin looking at the needs then? How do we evaluate this from the perspective of I want to feel happier, but I'm really looking at a need. So how do I start that conversation?
Well, I think it's just a bit of self-inquiry, and it actually can be difficult at first if we're not used to doing it, especially if we show up from a mindset of this original meaning of the word, right, of like happenstance. Like you hear it in people's language, and maybe they will have an idea that they'll have someone that they know of that seems to be very happy, and they attribute it to luck, right? Like they'll go,
Right.
oh, good things are always happening to him. He's so lucky. Like every time he turns around, some good thing happens, and that's why he's happy. And see, I'm miserable over here because these good things aren't happening to me, right? So it's that kind of a mindset. And if we can kind of shake out of that and figure out, okay, what is it? Like, if you feel unhappy that a certain thing is going on, it's attached to a need that you have. And so that's, instead of just being in this mindset of, oh, I'm so unhappy. Like, it's been raining for 3 solid days, and I'm just so unhappy. I'm so unhappy with this rain. Okay, we can talk about that and be unhappy, or we can go a step further and say, well, what is it that you really need? Like, if I'm feeling unhappy, it's because I have a need that's not being met. And maybe the need is to get out and be in community, and that hasn't been able to happen because of the rain. Or maybe the need is to get out in nature, and that hasn't been able to happen because of the rain. Or maybe the need is just for sunlight. Or, the needs can go on. And when we hit that one, that's the one. It's like, oh, that's what I really needed. And sometimes we can figure out another way to get the need met.
True.
And sometimes just figuring out what it is such a breakthrough that it feels like, oh, gosh, I feel so much better already just knowing what this is.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if I say that I need a certain thing, often it's the strategy. Like, I use this example sometimes when I'm teaching, is that I can say, Walt, I need you to take me to lunch. Well, I don't really need Walt to take me to lunch. I might need food. I might need transportation. Maybe I just need, community, hanging out with a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all basic human needs. To eat,
Sure.
to be able to get somewhere, right? But when I say I need someone, you, Walt, to do something, take me here, that's not really my need. That's my strategy to get my need met. Someone else could take me. I could hang out with someone else. I could have food delivered. There's all other ways to have that need met, whatever that need is.
And
so when we talk about science strategies for happiness, first I think it's figuring out what the need is. Then we can make a strategy.
It's potentially an unhealthy need, too, because if you are dependent upon the idea of Walt has to take you out for lunch, you're basically saying Walt is the one who's responsible for whether or not my needs get met. That's not the best strategy.
Exactly. And that's why this whole idea of finding out what the actual need is actually so healthy, because we take responsibility for getting our own needs met when we start doing this, right? And if we realize, a lot of times people will be sort of obsessing over that strategy that they've figured out, and they'll be upset, right? Because it's not happening. It's like, oh, I needed Walt to take me to lunch, and now he can't, and I'm upset about that, right? Instead of going and start digging down, it's like, well, what was the real need? Well, the real need is I need food. Well, I could just get food delivered. There we go. So there's always a way. And I love the idea of getting down, figuring out what needs we have, and then creating a strategy that we actually can use. And so that's what we're talking about today, is strategies for more happiness. And so one of the things that I think is important, especially with this conversation of LOA today, here's a strategy. Walt's now going to tell you how to subscribe to our podcast.
Very nicely done, yes. Actually, the bywords of the week are subscribe and share, because not only do we want people to subscribe, we also want people to share what they're getting out of the podcast with friends and followers on social media and so forth, so we can spread the message, because most people, believe it or not, just don't know about LOA Today. We're trying to get that word out as much as we can, and there's nobody who can get that word out as well as our current listeners. So subscribing is simple. If you haven't done it already, all you really do is go to loatoday.net. There are subscribe buttons all over the homepage there. You can't miss them. It works really nicely on an iPhone, because the iPhone has software that just guides you right through the process of getting the podcast loaded and subscribed into your podcast software that comes built in with the iPhone. On Android phones like Samsungs and Motorola's and Nokia's and so forth, they don't usually come with a built-in podcast app, but the good news is you can get one. There are a lot of free ones too. Just go to the Play Store and do a search on podcast apps. A really nice free one is called Podcast Manager. But just install that, and then once you open the app, then you can do a search on LOA Today, and poof, we pop up there, and click the subscribe button, and now you're subscribed there as well. So by all means, please do subscribe, and then after you subscribe, share.
Very good. You know, that's the thing when you share things. I'm trying to remember, there was a number that they said, like when you see an ad in a magazine, let's say in a local paper or magazine you see an ad for a restaurant. I think they said that people will see that ad like a dozen times before they'll actually like go check it out most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But when a friend is sharing something with you, when your friend calls you and says, you guys have got to go try this new place that just opened, it's fantastic, you probably don't have to hear of it a time or two before you make a decision to go.
Right.
And so if you're enjoying the podcast, tell other people. Those are the people that you tell, those are the people that will come listen because they trust you, right?
That's right. And most likely, if they're your friends, they're going to have a similar interest level as you will. So you're doing them a huge favor, and you're doing yourself a favor, too, because you talked earlier, Cindy, about how, for instance, with the making of the bed, you can get yourself to feel better. Well, actually, sharing something that a friend likes, that also feels good.
Yeah, it definitely does. So I think that I would love it if you would share. We would love it. Our audience is growing, and what that means is that more people listening to programs like this where they're getting information to raise their happiness level to a higher level, it's just a happier planet, right?
It is a happier planet. And it does also something else specifically for the show. The more listeners we get, the more we become enabled to expand the schedule. I mean, right now we're doing 12 shows a week, which is great. But wouldn't it be even greater if we can get to the point where we have shows running 24 hours a day? So any time of day that you want to listen, you can tune in, and you could even call in and talk to somebody and get their expertise on it.
Yeah, I love that. That's a big vision. That's awesome.
It's a huge vision, but the only way to make it happen is when the listenership grows enough that you can justify putting the resources in. You have to have the listenership, otherwise there's no way to do it. It doesn't work.
Right. Fantastic.
Unfortunately, our listenership's growing.
This is something very interesting that I wanted to be sure and talk about for a second, because I'm looking at this idea of strategies for happiness, and this article that's about science-backed strategies for happiness that was done by UC Berkeley, I believe. This is what's interesting, the beginning of it. It says that the General Assembly of the United Nations proclaimed March 20th to be the International Day of Happiness.
Well, it's certainly the Northern Hemisphere Day for Happiness, because that's like the day before the first day of spring. So.
Right. That's a good point, because that's a time where everything feels like it's new again, right? And It's a happy time. But this is the part I loved. It's easy to understand why they see happiness as something to celebrate. Happy people are healthier. They get sick less often. They live longer. Happy people are more likely to get married and have fulfilling marriages. They have more friends. They make more money. They are more productive at work. And this is based on decades of research.
So they're healthier, they're happier, they're wealthier, and they have more friends. That pretty much covers like 98% of the things that people want.
Like what people want, right? That's what I was going to say, is when someone comes to hire a coach, I can tell you that it's usually going to fall into one of three areas, but it always falls into one of four. And those areas are relationship, health, money, and their purpose, their path in life, right? That's everything that I just read.
Yeah.
They're more productive, they make more money, they're more likely to get married and have fulfilling marriages, they have more friends, they're healthier, they get sick less often. So I like the way this article wrapped up that paragraph by saying, based on decades of research, it's become clear that happiness is not just a personal issue. It's a matter of public health, global economics, and national well-being. So if that opening paragraph isn't enough to perk us up and get us to say, okay, this is really important, right?
Well, if it's not enough to get us to perk up, then it's probably time to go find a psychotherapist because we're in deep depression at that point.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I think that sometimes depression is even made worse by that idea of happenstance, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so this is like the big cure for thinking that we have to wait around for something good to happen. We don't. We can actually put some things into practice, lots of things actually. And the more I look at this, the more, and I know there's been books coming out in the past 5 years and, about happiness, but a quick Google search on strategies for happiness will bring you lists and lists of actual things you can do. And some of them are really remarkable. And some of them are very simple, and we may take them for granted, like acknowledging the good, right?
Yeah, sure. In fact, as I think about it, I just saw something earlier today that we talked about pre-show, indicating just how powerful the need is for happiness. Because a number of years ago, Harvard University had their most popular course ever, and it was a course in positive psychology. And it was a course that Sean Aker, the author, was a teaching assistant for, and that actually helped define his career, the experience of that class. Well, Yale University just broke the record because this year they're offering a class that has 1,200 people. The Harvard school had 900 people in that class. This one has 1,200 people in it. And when you get 1,200 students at a very competitive institution like an Ivy League school, Yale University, Harvard University, those are really competitive schools. And when you get 1,200 people in a school like that signing up for happiness, there's a need for it. There's a driving need for it.
I think that's just phenomenal and amazing that there was such, a rush to register for those classes. Because it's something that you told me earlier was about how fast the class filled up.
Yeah, they offered the class. 300 people had signed up after the first day, 600 within like 3 days after that. A week later, it was up to 1,200. It was like, boom!
Amazing. And that's got to be a record, too. So that's amazing. Okay, so we know that people are interested in becoming happier and learning ways that they can make that happen, that they can take control over their own happiness level. So let's talk about some of those ways.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, I have a number of favorites that I've developed over the years because early on, when I was first exploring the law of attraction and how to apply it in my own life and trying my own early experiments and failing in many cases, I wanted to know, well, why isn't it working? I mean, is this just a great big fraud, or is there something that I'm just not doing right? And unfortunately, my method for finding out the information was a bit haphazard, so it took me a while, but I did find it eventually, and learned about this concept of resistance and of allowing and how important it is to allow whatever it is that you're trying to attract. And in simplest terms, the way I think of it is, if my mindset outside of the time when I asked for whatever it is, if my mindset outside of that is in conflict with whatever I asked for, then, well, guess what? It's not going to show up. It just can't. The example I like to give is, well, I want to have $1 million, and immediately follow that with, yeah, right, that's never going to happen. I just killed it right there. Because I convinced myself.
I often think about that, the people that say they want to win the lottery, and as soon as they say it, they follow it up with something like, oh my goodness, you know how much the taxes you'd have to pay if you, and it's like, yeah, you're never going to win that. You don't want to pay the taxes.
I love the story that Joel tells about that. He says Joel works a lot with people who have gambling addictions. He himself is a recovered gambling addict, and one of his clients once said to him that he was really appreciative about how Joel had been teaching him about the law of attraction, and he was so excited that he was going to win the lottery. And he went out and bought 100 lottery tickets because he was going to win the lottery. And Joel said, "You're not going to win the lottery." And the guy said, "Why not?" He said, "Because you bought 100 lottery tickets. If you really believed you were going to win the lottery, you'd only need to buy one."
Fun, right?
I mean, it's funny, but it's sad at the same time. But it just goes to show how many different ways we can defeat ourselves. We just don't even realize the different ways that we're defeating ourselves. So it becomes critically important to get ourselves into that happiness zone and stay there as much as possible. So among the strategies I developed for myself, it took me a long time, actually. I was trying first, what others do. I wanted to find out, so what are other people's strategies? Because, if it works for them, it should work for me, right? And I found, no, it doesn't. Because the strategies that work for people work for them. They don't necessarily work for me. My happiness is not based on the same things as their happiness. So people would give me, here's a bunch of affirmations to do. And I try the affirmations, and believe it or not, I lose interest in doing affirmations within one day. And I'm thinking, well, this doesn't work. If I can't even stick to the affirmations, I'm screwed. I'm done. This isn't going to work. I finally tried a whole bunch of things and discovered my top 5 things to do to get myself into a happier place. And it took me a lot of experimenting to do it. And I can tell you what my top 5 are, and people are welcome to try them, but just because they're my top 5 doesn't mean they're going to be their top 5. What you get a lot of people in your practice, Cindy. Do you find that everybody uses the same strategies?
Oh, no. There's always, of course, when I talk to somebody that seems like a strategy may work for them and it's worked for someone else, we definitely start there.
Yeah.
But like you said, everybody's different, and we all have, and it goes back to the needs, right? We all have different needs. We all have the same basic human needs, but sometimes the ones that aren't getting met, those are different, and we have to look at that. We have to look at our environment, because environment will trump intention. And so we need to have our environment be helping us and supporting us in our goals. And that's going to be just different for everyone.
Mm. And sometimes environments don't support, do they?
I don't find the same things help everybody. We can start somewhere, right? But it's always going to end up being customized for each person. We're unique.
We certainly are. So with that caveat in place, we'll tell you what some of my strategies are, and maybe you can share some of yours. My number one strategy that it took me a long time to discover was one I probably should have known. I probably should have realized that it was going to be a good one for me, but for some reason it just never occurred to me. Because I'm a musician, at least I was a musician, I haven't played in a long time, but my dominant sense is auditory, and it turns out my best strategy is listening to positive music. Now, you would think that somebody who loves music and whose strongest sense is hearing would think of that first. It was actually about number 65 on the list that I tried. But it does work for me, and I love it. I have honed my list down. Currently, I was at like 35, 40 songs on it, and the approach I usually take is I find a whole bunch of songs, I plug them into the list, and then I start playing them. And as I get to one that doesn't really work, I remove it from the list. So I start big and then I call until I get down to a cold list that is very tightly compact, full of stuff that makes me feel really, really good. And when I play that music, it always gives me a boost. How much of a boost is going to vary from day to day, but it always gives me a boost. So that's my number one. Others on my list include walking. I love doing daily walks when it's not, freezing cold out. Getting out into nature and so forth. One of them is actually lying in my lap as we're doing the podcast. My cat, we have 2 cats actually, and I love playing with them, petting the cats. Those always feel good. Just interacting with them and enjoying them as independent beings. They're fun. They're just fun animals. Any pet animal is good to do that with. I love having conversations with my wife. My wife and I, lately especially, have been doing conversations about LOA and talking about our own stuff and bringing up strategies with each other and helping each other get into a better place, and plus talking about other stuff too. I just love talking with my wife. As my wife likes to say to me, I just love the sound of your voice, and that's the way I feel too. So there's one of my other happy things to do. We like going out to dinner. That's a happy thing to do. It's all these little simple things. There are no really big happy strategies. Of all the ones that I've heard that others have suggested, the one that did work for us is one we do in the evenings. We call it our 3 good things. Kind of similar to what you and I do at the beginning of the podcast, where we talk about recent wins. Well, the 3 good things are 3 good things that happened today. And if I come up with 3 good things and she comes up with 3 good things, that's 6 things. And as we're talking about them, we're just trying to relive them, kind of, re-explore and feel again what happened when those good things happened, kind of reprogramming the subconscious mind that, yes, good things happen all the time. So, I mean, those are some of mine. What are some of yours?
I'm really glad you mentioned the 3 good things. When I was in coaching school, and yesterday a Facebook message popped up, and it was something that I had posted 8 years ago yesterday, and it was actually I had finished my coaching certification 8 years ago yesterday.
Wow, congratulations. Happy anniversary.
Yeah, thank you. It was kind of fun to see that. I was like, wow, 8 years. Okay, time flies. But when I was in coaching school, probably I was in coaching school. The program that I did was full-time for a year. I'm thinking this was at the beginning, like maybe within the first month or so. This was actually an exercise it was an assignment. It was an exercise that was an assignment that was given to us called 3 Good Things. And it was actually a journal. You're doing it with your wife talking, which is awesome. We had to write down each evening 3 good things that went well in the day and add some kind of detail about them. And what was interesting was that there were 2 instructors that had come from Australia, I believe, and they were like student teachers. They had gone through the program maybe the year prior or a couple years before, and they had come in for a long weekend and were doing a little teaching because they were going to become instructors, and so they were kind of doing their student teaching. And this was the day that we learned about the 3 Good Things exercise. And the one woman, they asked her to talk about it, and she talked about when she learned of this exercise. And I wish I could remember all the details. I can't. I just remember that her whole life changed. Like, she started talking about the changes in her life from just doing this one thing, and they were big, dramatic shifts and changes over the course of like 6 months. Like miracles were really happening. And it was just from this one idea of 3 good things. So I was really excited when I heard you say that because I kind of had forgotten about it. Yes, I totally love the idea of having someone that you love to talk to. I, as well, love to talk to my guy and tell him all the time. As a matter of fact, when I first met him, I remember saying to him on the phone, "Has anyone ever told you that you have such a nice voice?" And he said no. I love the sound of his voice. I love the sound of his voice and love talking to him. And so we have those good talks as well. The other thing I noticed when you were talking about your walks, I happened to look over, and right here it says they're talking about a savoring walk. And it says you take a 20-minute walk and observe the sights, sounds, and smells you encounter. And I would say, maybe sounds is the big one for you, being so auditory. But it says freshly cut grass, an epic skyscraper, a stranger's smile. Each time you notice something positive, take the time to absorb it and think about why you enjoy it. What I think is cool about that is that we're so busy that sometimes everything we do is sort of autopilot, And this is both of these things, 3 good things and a savoring walk, are really encouraging us to be aware of what's around us, like savor it, take time to absorb it, think about it. The music, yes, I don't know why. You said it was down on your list of like 65, on that list. Me too, and I kind of wonder at myself about that because I spent many years being a singer-songwriter, and I definitely notice that it's an instant vibe lifter to put music on.
Oh yeah.
And so I need to do it more often, more consciously, with the intent, purpose of raising my vibe. I love that you have made a positive playlist. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really something I recommend highly to anyone. If you like any music at all, try it. It's quite an exercise to do it. Because first of all, you have to think of some positive songs, and that alone can take you a while. Because most of the music is so negative. You know, the themes are negative, and you know, a lot of the music is angry, especially if it's, you know, like rock and roll, that's a hard rock, something like that. Oh, I mean, after a while, you
Or
just feel
sad.
defeated. You're sad or
There's plenty of
depressing. The
sad music out
blues.
there, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, oh please help me. And actually, that's one of the reasons I stopped playing music, believe it or not, because all the music that I was playing was so depressing.
Mm.
I've actually gotten to the point now where I'm thinking maybe at some point I start taking up a musical instrument again, assuming I can just keep myself on this path of just listening to positive music, stuff that makes me feel good.
Yeah. Well, I think that creativity, you know, speaking of picking up an instrument, writing music, playing music, with me, any kind of creativity is going to boost my happiness level. So, and it's something that this year I have made a strong intention and a declaration even, because I keep telling people, and I keep doing it, to make sure that I want to say every day. It's probably not going to be every day, but at least most days, that I take some time to do something creative. I'm a painter and an illustrator in, you know, something, a hobby, something I like to do. So it's either knitting or painting or drawing or writing, as much as I can, probably every day, because those things are the things that really feed my soul. And when I'm not doing them, I know it affects my level of how happy I feel.
Mm.
And so it's just something about the colors, the textures, you know, whatever medium I'm using, it just takes me away into a space of peace. And so I add that in. And this year I got really intentional about it and said, no, I'm going to, and I have little spots, you know, like the spot where I keep my knitting and spot where I keep all my art supplies. It's like, and even like reading and writing, those are things that bring me a lot of joy. So it's not just knowing that they bring me joy, but it's actually doing them and setting myself up, this is the part about environment trumps intention. You know, if I take all my art supplies and pack them away in a box, and all my books, and they're packed away in a box, and my knitting is in the closet, then my environment is not helping.
No.
And it will trump my intention, no matter how good my intention is. I say, oh, yeah, I want to work on knitting that sweater. And then every time I think about it, I'm like, oh, but I have to get into that box in the back of the closet and drag it all out. And, yeah, I'll just do it later, right? And it's something that just gets procrastinated about forever because it's not, my environment is not set up to support that activity. And so that could happen with anything. It could even happen with music. Having an easy way to just put the music on. You know, we have to make it easy for ourselves and set up our environment to where the things that we want to do are accessible to us and not a big hassle. It's one of the reasons why I never sew anymore, because in this house I don't have a sewing room, and it requires me to drag out the sewing machine and clean off the dining room table and set up all the sewing there, and it's just a big pain. So it's like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that.
Well, yeah, with the music,
So
I'm grateful to Steve Jobs because he made it easier to put music in the environment. I mean, he and Apple invented the iPod and then later the iPhone. So, I mean, not just with iPhones, also with Android phones too. Now you can carry your music around with you, all in this little device that goes into your pocket, and it's all your favorite stuff, and you get to decide what's going to play. I mean, what an empowering tool that is.
You know, there's that quote that says, any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right?
Yeah, right.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And for me, even after all these years, being able to have, you know, an MP3 player, being able to have music on my phone, that still feels magical to me.
Yeah.
Technology is amazing. And so, yeah, I think things that feed your soul, you were talking about your cats, pets. I mean, just interacting with animals has been shown to, like, lower blood pressure and, you know, all these things in the body that create better health, more peace, and more happiness. So definitely some people aren't going to want to hang out with cats, right?
Some people are allergic.
Right, exactly. And that goes back to so we need to find what works for ourselves. what is it that works for us.
And that's just really about being willing to experiment. And experiment means being willing to try something that doesn't work and not giving up. And saying, okay, well, that one didn't work, so what's the next thing that I can try? And persisting until we finally get to the point where we find one or two or even three or four or five different things that work for us. And sometimes you just have to try stuff in order to find it.
Now, there's an interesting thing about, yes, agreed. We have to be willing to be a little adventurous, right? Trying new things is important. I think that's part of, though, everything we've talked about, we can fit that in, like conversations and music, like listening to new songs.
Yep.
Creating, even with my knitting, trying a new pattern, with making art, trying new supplies, just being willing to kind of go beyond what we know a little bit, and even on your walk, right? You're probably out there looking for new things that you haven't seen, noticed before. But this is what I saw that I thought was interesting, and I actually did a workshop where I used an exercise like this, and it was subtraction of things to appreciate them. So imagining your life without a certain thing that you appreciate will cause you to appreciate it more, and that raises your happiness level.
That makes sense when you think about it. Because the more you appreciate
and it's something we don't normally do, right? So it's it was an interesting exercise that we did where we actually painted a picture, and then the people would go through, they would pick 5 things that they just painted in their painting. So just imagine like a really simple picture that a kid might draw with a sun and a house and a tree, right? And then they would describe, when I take away the tree, I miss, and they would talk about whatever they would miss, a sense of. And it was a really powerful exercise, and it's just like this one that I'm looking at, where mental subtraction of positive things causes you to appreciate them more. I always talk, we don't know what we have until it's gone.
Yeah, right.
Putting a gun on that and doing a mental exercise with it, and just to raise our appreciation level.
It's a good point, and until we are willing to acknowledge what is important to us, and even acknowledge that if it were to go away, we would be really disappointed. Once we do that, we want to do it more. We want to engage in it more. We want to keep it more, and that's part of the whole thing about building up our own happiness levels, is repeating the activities as often as possible throughout our day, interspersed with the stuff we quote have to do unquote. That's what builds our happiness up until we finally get to the point where, this surprised me. I wasn't sure I was going to get here, but I got to the point where like 80% of my day, I'm feeling good. And actually, I think it's closer to 90% now. I'm doing a lot better. And when I first started, awesome. I was in, like depression and anger land. So it's been a really, really big shift. And one that I will recommend everybody to get involved in if they haven't done it, because you really can move your needle, so to speak. I was surprised. I didn't think you could move your needle. Honestly, Cindy, I think I mentioned that to you before, but when I first started with this, I just really didn't think you could do it. I did not think that was possible. I guess I really bought into what the definition and the etymology of happiness was without even knowing what the etymology was.
Well, and we talk a lot about, especially in LOA, but even on our podcast, we talk a lot about identity and the story that we tell. Mm-hmm. And that whole, and I've heard people say this so many times, and you probably have too, but it's like, well, that's just the way I am.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, this is how I am. This is it. And it's like, well, if you take that statement and you apply it to like someone who's unhappy, it's almost like they don't see any way they can move that needle, just like you said. And so recognizing, to me, that's the big shift, is recognizing that you can move the needle.
Oh, yeah. I would also add, too, you mentioned stories, and this is not something I would recommend as an introductory thing to try. This is an advanced technique for building your happiness up. But one thing we all need to learn how to do better is storytelling, and not just storytelling in general, telling our own stories. Um, for instance, most of our stories we get from entertainment, right? From movies and from books and songwriters and singers and all the different entertainers that are out there. We want to be entertained, and that's certainly a fun part about stories, is being entertained with the stories. But by the same token, we actually gain more when we tell the stories. And it actually has gotten to the point now where I can say that it's not a lost art, but it is a very little utilized art. And yet the power of storytelling is just tremendous. It's one of those things that if we all took the time to learn how to be better storytellers, we would all be extremely happy people. Assuming, of course, we're telling positive stories. If we're telling negative stories, we're going to be among the most depressed people on the face of the earth by the time we're done. But if we choose to tell stories that feel good to us, we're going to push ourselves into the stratosphere with storytelling, because it really is that powerful, I think. I mean, do you disagree? Do you think it's true?
Oh, I think it's absolutely true. And here's what I think about it, about the idea that it's an advanced strategy. Well, I think we can develop advanced techniques for sure. And I also think we're all doing it already, maybe not at an advanced conscious level, but it's sort of like, well, it is law of attraction. You'll hear us say that law of attraction works. It's always working, whether you know it or not, whether you're deliberate in your creation or not, whether you're conscious of it or not. You're always creating your reality.
Right.
And so most of the time we're creating that by the stories that we tell. And it starts with the most important thing you can be aware of when you want to make a shift here is pay attention to your I am story. I am whatever. Because we tell that story, we tell these stories all the time whenever we describe ourselves, sometimes in our head and sometimes to other people. We've talked about those stories that we hear people tell, oh, I'm terrible at math. Right? Or I can never remember. I remember a face, but I'm terrible at remembering names.
How many times have I said
these
that?
These are things, I use them as examples because we've all either said them or heard them, like over and over. And so I always encourage people, like, create an I am statement for the day and then, take some steps to embody it. But tell a better story. Even when we didn't get enough sleep and we're so tempted to be walking around saying, I'm so exhausted, I am so tired, switch that up. I'm not saying that it's not true and that maybe you didn't sleep and that maybe you do feel tired, but just choose another one to focus on.
Absolutely.
Right? I'm so glad that I got at least an hour of sleep, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, we can flip it over and tell a different story. And even when people are going through something really hard, a lot of times they start identifying with that, and that thing becomes their story. And it becomes their story even how many people have you heard say, I'm a cancer survivor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And they really identify with it.
Yeah.
They identify with a current, illness. Like, I'm a diabetic, and they say it a lot, and they identify with it very strongly. Now, I'm not saying that we should lie about it and say those things aren't true, but we can switch the story around and say, I did have a battle with cancer, and now I'm in good health, or I'm in the process of becoming very healthy now, right? Instead of always stuck over there. Or, yes, I deal with diabetes, and I've found so many ways to help myself feel better, and I know that miracles happen every day, and I'm really proud of myself for finding so many strategies to keep myself feeling great. We can switch the story without denying the truth of whatever's going on.
Oh, yeah, that's a really important point, because the kind of story you're talking about is a really, really simple story. It's like a 1 or 2 sentence story. And you're right, those are the kinds of stories anybody can change the stories on. It's just a question of being willing to look at the silver lining rather than the black cloud, or at the good side rather than at the bad side. So, like, for example, from your example, the idea of, I was diagnosed with diabetes, but today I'm an advocate of my wellness and my good health. And that's a change in the story, just by changing that message around like that. The reason I called it an advanced strategy is I was thinking more in terms of more complete advanced storytelling, which is something that you don't want to just do right away. You want to start with the simple stories, because if you can change the simple stories, you give yourself the foundation for learning the more advanced kind. The advanced kind, the advanced kind is really cool though when you get to that point, when you evolve to that point, because with the advanced kind, not only do you say, well, I am now a wellness advocate, but you start telling the entire story about how, yes, I was once diagnosed, but I started doing all these things, and I started focusing on my feelings, and focusing on how I was talking to myself, and I started changing it. And so while I used to talk about how I was overweight and I was diabetic and my sugar levels were too high, I started changing my whole dialogue to I feel better, and I'm taking actions that help me feel better, and I eat better, and I've been getting out and doing things and getting some exercise in. I actually have been shedding a little weight, and I've trimmed down a bit. And today I eat really healthy compared to where I used to, so much healthier than I did. And in the course of eating healthy, it actually influenced my family. So now my entire family is eating healthier. I mean, now you're telling this story, right? You're actually going through telling sentences and describing what happened, and then progressing over time. You know, like any good story does, a story progresses, right?
Yes, and I'm over here with a big smile on my face listening to you script that story, because yes, that is how you will learn to do that, is to just start small, like you said, with that a couple of those small sentences. And that's why I encourage people to choose. Like I will tell in my coaching group, I will say, what do you want to feel today? And go ahead and choose a story around it, and then decide on one action you're going to take that will support that. It's intentional, it's deliberate, and instead of just telling the stories that we tell on autopilot, we can start to become very deliberate about the stories that we tell and the way that we phrase them, and it will affect and change our experience.
Now, one thing people do get tripped up on is, well, that's not my reality right now. That would be really nice, but that's not my reality. And I'm not sure how you respond to that. I have a general idea. I know my response is along this line. We're not asking you to write your biography. We're asking you to write your fictional story. We're asking you to be a novel writer. So just like with any fictional story, the story isn't true yet. But just like when you were a kid and you're playing, imagine that I'm a fireman, or imagine that I'm a ballerina, or imagine this, or imagine that. You're not that yet, but you're imagining it because wouldn't it be great to be a ballerina or a fireman or whatever it is that you're imagining when you're a kid? Well, it's the same thing. You're practicing applying the imagination by writing a fictional story. And the cool thing is, if you're actually willing to write and to describe and to tell the fictional story, over time, the more that you tell it, it becomes true, just like for the kid who grows up to be the fireman or the ballerina.
That's right. And that's, we talked about that last week when we talked about Neville Goddard and his, maxim of assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled.
Yes.
We can start to step into that, what feels like a fictional character now. We can actually start, and this could be a whole show on this, but we can step into the identity of that person, and we can do it with concrete steps, like clothes and activities and words. We can actually start to step in to the picture of our better self, and that as well is a powerful technique.
Well, I'm glad we've been
right along with that storytelling.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad we've been talking about the storytelling. It's a great way to finish up this topic because it's probably the most powerful one that we can do. I do want to remind people, don't forget, subscribe and share. If you need to find out how that's done, just go back to the 20-minute mark of the program and play that part, and you'll be able to find out how to subscribe and share. Now, subscribe and share is wonderful, but it's not always the best way to solve every problem or to attack every need that you might have. Sometimes you need to talk to somebody. So if somebody needs to talk to you, how do they reach out to talk to you?
You can find me on the web at cindychavez.com, at CINDIECHAVEZ.com. And you can find a contact form on my website where you can send me an email and reach out that way, or find me on Facebook or Twitter. I would love to hear from you.
That sounds great. Cindy, let's do it again tomorrow. We got a good topic coming up. Well, we won't tell them what it is, but they definitely want to tune in.
Okay. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right. We'll see you all tomorrow as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.